Dawson and Callan were face down on the floor. Cora was on her side with her torso turned towards the floor. He removed the bands and begged them to breathe. He continued to scream uncontrollably and screamed for officers to come to the basement. The dispatchers are hearing this and they send help down to the basement. And when they encounter Patrick, he yells out, "She killed the kids."
We're learning more gruesome details about the murders of 3 young Massachusetts children as their mother, Lindsay Clancy, is charged in their deaths. In Clancy's first court appearance since the murders, she appeared virtually from her hospital bed.
On Friday, January 27, 2023, using an erasable whiteboard because she was still temporarily intubated, one of the first questions that Lindsay Clancy asked was, "Do I need an attorney?" She knew that she had murdered her children, and she had the clarity, focus, and mental acumen to focus on protecting her own rights and interests.
Prosecutors outlined the events that led up to the murders on January 24th, alleging Lindsay Clancy meticulously planned the deaths of 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan before attempting her own suicide by jumping out of a second-story window.
On the morning of Tuesday, January 24th, 2023, the defendant took her 5-year-old daughter, Cora, to the pediatrician's for an appointment. She interacted with a receptionist, nursing staff, and a doctor. There were apparently no issues with the defendant's demeanor or behavior as she completed the appointment and was allowed to leave with Cora without any issues or concerns. When she returned home, she went outside with Cora and a 3-year-old son, Dawson, to play in the snow. They built a snowman. The defendant sent photos to her mother and to the defendant, to her husband. She texted with them. Nothing in the text was out of the ordinary or any sign of any distress or trouble.
After that, prosecutors say Lindsay Clancy searched for the 3V restaurant in Plymouth, about 25 minutes from her home in Duxbury.
She then searched at takeout 3V via her cell phone at 4:13 p.m. Immediately after doing that, she used Apple Maps on her phone to determine how long it would take someone to drive from her home in Duxbury to 3V restaurant in Plymouth. So she would know how long someone would be gone if they ran that errand.
It was then that Clancy texted her husband, Patrick Clancy, asking for takeout.
At 4:53 p.m., the defendant texted her husband, who was working in his home office in their basement. She texted, "Any chance you want to do takeout from 3V? I didn't cook anything. It's been a long day." This was an unusual request, as when the family ordered takeout, they'd usually go somewhere closer to home, but it was a place that they had been in the past. Patrick Clancy texted back yes, and then the defendant asked him to check the menu.
Minutes later, Patrick Clancy left the family home.
At 5:15 p.m., Patrick Clancy headed out the door to run these errands at the defendant's request. As he left, she texted him Pedialyte liquid stool softener. Surveillance footage shows Mr. Clancy at CBS on Summer Street in Kingston at 5:32 p.m. He goes to the medication aisle, the children's medication aisle. Phone records show that he called the defendant at 5:33 p.m. and she did not answer the phone. He then calls him back at 5:34 p.m. and the call lasted 14 seconds. He's there at the store unsure of which medication to get, and she tells him exactly what she wants. He had no issues communicating with her. It was a completely normal call, although he did mention that she seemed like she was in the middle of something.
When Patrick Clancy returned home, he found a tragic scene.
When he arrived home, the first thing he noticed was the silence. He did not see or hear the defendant or the children. He actually called her cell phone at 6:09 p.m. looking for them, and she did not answer. He went to their bedroom on the second floor and the door was locked. He was able to open it, and when he looked inside, he saw blood on the floor in front of a full-length mirror and the window open. He immediately runs downstairs and into the backyard, where he finds the defendant laying on the ground. She appeared to have cuts on her wrists and neck, but he stated to 911 that those wounds were no longer bleeding. She was conscious. He called 911. During this time, he asked the defendant, "What did you do?" She responded to him, "I tried to kill myself and jumped out the window." During the 911 call, Patrick can be heard asking the defendant, "Where are the kids?" He later told police that she replied, in the basement. So immediately after this happened, she knew what she had done and she knew where the kids were. When EMS arrived, he asked them to stay with her so he could go find his kids. The 911 call kept going. Patrick can be heard on the 911 call entering the home and heading to the basement. At one point, he calls out, "Guys." He can then be heard screaming in agony and shock as he found his children. His screams seem to get louder and more agonized as the time passes.
Prosecutors say the 3 Clancy children were found with exercise bands around their necks.
Cora and Callan were on the floor in the den area of the finished basement, which is to the left when you walk down the stairs, while Dawson was alone on the floor in his father's home office, which is to the right when you go down the stairs. Each child still had the exercise band that was used to strangle them tied around their necks when their father found them. Dawson and Callan were face down on the floor. Cora was on her side with her torso turned towards the floor. He removed the bands and begged them to breathe. He continued to scream uncontrollably and screamed for officers to come to the basement. The dispatchers are hearing this and they send help down to the basement. And when they encounter Patrick, he yells out, "She killed the kids."
Cora and Dawson were pronounced dead at the hospital the same day. Baby Callan was rushed to Boston Children's Hospital but died 3 days later. Ahead of their deaths, prosecutors say Clancy spent time in the hospital for mental health issues, but was being treated for her symptoms. She even told her husband she was improving.
According to her husband, she was never on more than 4 to 5 medications at one time. And at the time of the murder, she was taking only 3 medications. And he said to the police that she always took the medications as prescribed. After her stay at McLean, the defendant appeared to be getting better, according to her husband. She slept well, interacted with friends and family. She went out with her kids and husband to places like the Kingsbury Club in Duxbury, the Charlie Horse Restaurant, the Museum of Science in Boston, the Cape Codder down the Cape, interacting with her family and the public without any apparent difficulties. She even stayed alone with the children on several occasions without any issues in January of 2023. Her husband asked her in mid-January, "Are you still having suicidal thoughts?" And she said no.
Prosecutors argue Clancy never had hallucinations or delusions before the murders.
On the night of the killings, Patrick Clancy was interviewed by the police at Beth Israel Deaconess Plymouth Hospital. He told the police that the defendant was having one of her best days. She was smiling and happy, and there was no indication that she was going to harm the kids. No one at all described her as acting like a zombie in the days leading up to the murder or on the day of the murders themselves. On February 5th, 2023, this past Sunday at 1:35 p.m., while sitting with Dr. Paul Zeisel, the psychologist hired by defense counsel to evaluate her mental state, the defendant used Dr. Zeisel's cell phone to call her husband. She left a voicemail stating that she loved him. Yesterday, on February 6, 2023, at 10:09 a.m., she again used Dr. Zeisel's cell phone to call her husband. This time he answered, and during this call, the defendant stated that after he left the house that night, she killed the kids because she heard a voice and had, quote, "a moment of psychosis," end quote. He asked her what voices she heard, and she said she heard a man's voice telling her to kill the kids and kill herself because it was her last chance. Patrick Clancy told the police the defendant had never heard voices before. He also told the police the defendant had never used the word psychosis to him before. The first time she used that word psychosis was when she was with a doctor hired by defense counsel and using his cell phone.
Prosecutors also say Clancy had every opportunity to change her mind about going through with the murders, as they say it took time to strangle each child. Instead, they say she acted deliberately.
The children were killed by ligature strangulation. Ligature strangulation causes the victim to become unconscious anywhere from 10 seconds up to a minute. The more the victim struggles, the longer it takes. After the victim is unconscious, the ligature must be held in place with force, squeezing the neck for up to an additional 4 to 5 minutes to cause death. Therefore, she had to strangle each of them to unconsciousness and then make sure the bands were squeezing their little necks for several minutes. She could have changed her mind at any point during that time and removed those bands from their necks, and she did not. The defendant did not take advantage of the situation when her husband left the home that night. She created the situation, and she used Apple Maps to make sure she would have enough time to strangle each child before her husband returned from where she had sent him. The defendant is a danger to herself and others. She planned these murders, gave herself the time and privacy needed to commit the murders, and then she strangled each child in the place where they should have felt the safest, at home with their mom. She did so with deliberate premeditation and extreme atrocity and cruelty.
Clancy's defense argued she is a woman with mental health struggles on top of newly sustained physical trauma.
So you have a paraplegic who can't walk, who is definitely a danger to herself, and the government wants to put her in where? Framingham State Prison? Plymouth House of Correction? There's no way that any humane person would do that, especially within the structure of our criminal justice system, where a person is presumed innocent. And I'm not suggesting with the facts that the government has read, but she has a good defense. She's got a darn good defense for this case, because that's what happened.
Clancy's team said her suicide attempt caused major injuries, rendering her a paraplegic.
To have this woman not held on bail, perhaps put a GPS on her, I guess, if someone's concerned that she's going to miraculously recover, which isn't going to happen. As your Honor knows, being a paraplegic, paralyzed, she can't move. Can't get off the bed. She can't walk. She can't even go to the bathroom. She has to have 24/7 medical care.
The defense also noted that Clancy is suicidal, saying her cries for mental health help were ignored.
We all know that this woman is, as counsel concedes apparently, a danger to herself. I question whether she would ever make it to a trial. She's suicidal. She's extremely emotional. However, she's unable and has been unable to express any happiness or sadness or cry. And in fact, sometime about a month or two ago, she made the comment, "I just wish that I could feel something." Now, our society fails miserably in treating women with postpartum depression or even postpartum psychosis. It's medicate, medicate, medicate. Throw the pills at you and then see how it works. If it doesn't work, increase the dose or decrease the dose. Then end up trying another combination of medications.
In the end, presiding Judge John Canavan ruled no monetary bail would be set just yet.
The factual allegations in this case are both horrific and tragic. The potential penalty faced by the defendant, if convicted, is severe. The defendant has no criminal history. She does not even have a driving record. There is no evidence of any history of any abusive behavior by the defendant. The defendant was raised in New England and has extensive ties to the local area. She has an extremely supportive family. She had worked for several years in a local hospital, and a number of co-workers have written letters in support of the defendant and her character. She's described in these letters as an exemplary worker, colleague, and friend. In the letter submitted by her attending trauma surgeon, she has extensive injuries that will require long-term inpatient rehabilitation. Weighing what the doctor has written and the facts from the defendant's current condition, the court finds that there is minimal risk of flight given the defendant's circumstances. The court is going to make the following order on bail. The defendant shall remain in her current hospital until medically cleared to be moved to a new facility. As a condition of bail, the defendant is ordered not to leave the hospital until discharged to a new facility. The defendant shall provide notice to probation 48 hours in advance of any transfer to a different facility. Based on the letter of the doctor, it would appear likely that she would be sent from the hospital setting to a 24/7 rehabilitation facility.
The judge ruled Clancy could be transferred to a different facility or potentially even home confinement as she recovers. Right now, she's due back in court on May 2nd for a probable cause hearing. Reporting for Law and Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.